everybody! So it is already nearing the end of January.
Wow.
So we decided to pop in and share with you a few books that we each read in the first month of 2020.
Yeah.
I think we all read some really great books this month.
Yeah,
so
this has definitely been a good reading month.
we're excited to share them with you. And without further ado, to the books!
The first one I read this month was Stepping Stones by Lucy Knisley. This is one of the ones off of Penguin Random House's new graphic novel imprint, which I've loved everything I've read off of them so far. I think they're doing an awesome job. So this is about our main character, Jen, who is, I think, quite closely based on Lucy herself growing up. Her parents have somewhat recently divorced, and her mom has decided to follow her dream of leaving the city and moving to the country. So they have bought a farm, and her mom is now like running a stand at the local farmers market. And she has a new stepdad, and also suddenly she has two stepsisters who spend weekends with them. So she doesn't want to be far away from her dad. She doesn't want to be doing all of these like labor-intensive farm chores, and she's a bit grumbly about it. But she loves drawing. She's great at it. Surprise, surprise, she grows up to be a graphic novelist. But it's just this great sort of coming of age over the span of a summer, set in the country, and like adjusting to new people and sort of being thrown into situations that you're not super comfortable with. Really loved it.
So I started this decade off with reading Circe by Madeline Miller, and I am so blown away by this book. First of all, I went into it thinking I knew something about Greek mythology. I know nothing about Greek mythology. I know kind of like, the bits and pieces of Odysseus and the Icarus myth and stuff. But Circe was just so fantastic. So it follows the story of a goddess named Circe, but she's kind of like one of those lower gods. She doesn't have a lot of like the typical like big god power. Most of her power comes from like witchcraft. So she uses like things from the earth to gain her power. And I loved how multifaceted and complex Circe was. So the story follows from her childhood to adulthood, I guess. And yeah, it's fantastic. I thought the book I've been reading a lot of like plot heavy books, and I felt like this book was very like character driven. And for a character driven book, it was such a page turner. I couldn't stop reading this book. It was well written. It was beautiful. It was about Circe kind of like taking back her power, gaining her power that she deserves. It was great. I'm so excited to read Song of Achilles, which Cori just gifted for me for Christmas, which is really nice. I'm super excited. I don't think anything can get better than Circe, but Cori insists that Song of Achilles is better, so we shall see.
So one of the very first books I read in the month of January was Us Against You by Fredrik Backman. I did a buddy read with this of my friend who lives in Victoria, and this is the sequel to the book Beartown, which I read last year and absolutely loved as well. It actually made my top 10 list of the year. So going into this book, I wasn't too sure what to expect because Beartown was the story of a sexual assault in a small hockey town. This book very much follows a lot of the same characters, dealing with a lot of the same issues. I don't think I've ever read a book written by a male author that discusses sexual assault and rape culture in such a nuanced way. You can see I have a lot of tabs in here of lines that I just felt were beautiful and powerful. And he also goes into the discussion of what masculinity is as well, and toxic masculinity, and being young and trying to figure out what it means, what masculinity means. It was such a fantastic story. I cried once, and I don't often cry when I was reading books, but it was just so emotional. This is definitely an adult novel, multiple content warnings in here. Again, there's abuse and sexual assault and alcoholism and car crashes, and there's a myriad of other things that I can't think of off the top of my head, but it is so well worth it. I do say you have to read Beartown to read this one. I think you just get a lot more impact from the story if you do.
Next is a new middle grade from Rebecca Stead, and that is The List of Things That Will Not Change. I read this book over Christmas, curled up next to the fire, and I couldn't put it down. It's a contemporary story about 10-year-old Bee, whose parents have split up, and it sort of talks about that this all happened when she was 8. She's about 10 now, and the list of things that will not change are it's sort of like an ever-growing list in this notebook that her parents gave her when they told her that they were splitting up. And it's like, number 1, we both love you, and it goes from there. So cutting back to present day, Bee's now 10 years old, and her dad and his partner Jesse announced that they are going to get married, so she's going to have a new dad. But along with that, again, is an unexpected sibling. Jesse has a daughter who's Bee's age from his previous marriage, and she's going to come and spend some time with them. Bee's super, super excited about that because she's an only child and has always wanted a sister, and then it's not quite what she wants it to be. I loved this book. I loved, it really felt like you were inside this 10-year-old's head, and she's just figuring out the world and isn't sure why she feels angry sometimes or sad sometimes, and is kind of torn between her mom and her dad, even though they get along really well. And she's got like all these big life changes on the horizon. I absolutely loved it.
The second book I want to talk about is a graphic novel, sort of maybe like an illustrated nonfiction book about Darwin. I don't actually have the Darwin book. I had to return it to the library, but it looks very similar to this. This is Audubon. It's about another biologist, but it's by the same makers, by Fabien, Grolleau, and Jérémie Royer, from the same like Nobel Press. And I loved the Darwin graphic novel. So instead of focusing on Darwin's like famous theories about evolution, the book focuses on like his 5-year journey to South America, to the Galapagos Islands, and it was a part of Darwin that I didn't know about. So my background is in biology, so I learned about Darwin in like every single one of my classes, but I actually didn't really think of him as a person. Like I just thought of him as a theory, as an idea. So reading this book, I kind of got to know a little bit about his personal history, how he was always like seasick on the HMS Beagle, on the ship that he journeyed on. How he hated how he hated the idea of like slavery, of what was going on in the Americas at that time. And it was fascinating. I loved it, and I wish I read this like back when I was in school, because it kind of adds to like how he came up with this theory and like kind of the thinking behind it. The book kind of touches about like his like theory of evolution kind of at the end, but it's mostly about like his personal journey to the islands, and it's really fascinating, and it's beautiful. It's like very similar illustrations to like this. It's it's very pretty, fun to read, super accessible for kids and adults.
Next up, we have a book that's very exciting, and that is The Silvered Serpents by Roshani Chokshi. This book has unfortunately been pushed back to September. This isn't due to any content of the book that needs to be rewritten or anything like that. Roshani has said that it's just for publishing reasons. It's kind of a weird industry sometimes, but so if you have an ARC, feel free to read it, she says. So I went ahead and read it, and I can safely say that I liked this one even more than The Gilded Wolves, the first book. This one is very angsty, which I think if you read the first book, you would kind of see coming. It also has a wintry Russian setting, which is really cool, and it's lots of ice, and it's just really interesting, and you get to know a lot more of the magic of this world in this one. I just love Severin and his crew of misfits. I love this found family. it does end in a way that is like entirely frustrating, but I'm just so glad I read it. Definitely put it on your list to pick up in September when it comes out. It is well worth the wait.
And finally, the last one on my list is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This, I think, is technically an adult book. Kind of hovers on the verge of YA and adult, but the main character is about 21 or 22, I believe. Anyways, I read this one for my book club because we had read 2 very serious books in a row and decided that we needed something light and fluffy and fun. And this fit the bill so perfectly for that. It is about the first son, the female president's son, who unexpectedly falls in love with the Prince of England. There's definitely like parallels to real life figures like Prince Harry or the Obamas are mentioned, and yet it's also set in like an alternate future where it's the same time frame we're in right now, but totally different political figures. There's so much drama. It's kind of sexy. It's more than kind of sexy. This is definitely an adult book. There are steamy scenes in this. But it was just like, it was a lot of fun. Not at all the type of book that I typically pick up, but I sure am glad that I did. Yeah, if you're just looking for something like romantic and fun to read, this is a good one to go with.
And finally, my third book is an audiobook that I listened to called The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise. I've been seeing this book all over Instagram. It's a middle grade fiction book, and yeah, it was such a great, I loved listening to it. It was so much fun. So for those of you who haven't read it, it's about a girl, Coyote, and her father, Rodeo. They live in a school bus that they refurbished as like their permanent home, and they've been on the road for 5 years. And this happened because 5 years prior to the start of the book, Coyote lost her mother and her 2 sisters, and through that grief and that pain, they couldn't like stand to live in their hometown in Washington State. So the dad and the daughter decided to just like sell everything, buy a van, and just like be on the road for the rest of their lives. So that's kind of how the story starts. And it was funny. Coyote is such a sassy kind of character. She's not like your typical like 12-year-old. She's like very adult, very mature, but also has like the same kind of like feelings and emotions of a kid who lost their mom and their siblings. And the book deals with like grief, about friendship, has lots of important issues about diversity. They meet a lot of different characters, a lot of different diverse characters on the road. And yeah, and in the book, she gets a phone call from her grandmother saying that the park in her neighborhood that she used to live in is going to be destroyed. And in that park, 5 years before, her mom and her sisters buried this box full of like kind of old memories, like photographs and like letters to each other and stuff. And she wants to go and collect that box again. But she knows that her dad will never, ever, ever go back to Washington State and never go back to their hometown. So she kind of like tricks him into driving, like they're in Florida at the start of the book, so she kind of tricks him into driving from Florida all the way to Washington State in like a span of like 3 days. And yeah, it's a good read. It was really heart-wrenching at the end. Yeah, and it makes for a really good audiobook. The narrator does such a really good job.
And the third book I want to talk about is The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ancrum. I actually picked this up because it was the Dragons and Tea Book Club book pick of the month, who one of the co-hosts is our lovely YouTube rep here, Melanie from Mel to the Annie. And I'm so glad I joined in with their buddy read. This is about a girl named Ryan. And again, it's a kind of a book with a found family, but she lives in a trailer park with her brother. Their parents are no longer in the picture, and they are basically just trying to survive, and she has kind of created her own little band of misfits that are they kind of get at each other's edges, but they love each other so much. Then one day a new girl named Alexandria arrives, and Ryan is tasked with befriending her and trying to get her out of her shell. And this doesn't really go as planned, as an accident happens and Alexandria ends up falling off a roof and breaking her arm. And through this incident, they are kind of forced and pushed together and end up becoming friends. And it turns out that Alexandria is actually the daughter of a woman who left Earth to go to space when Alexandria was just a newborn baby, and is still out in space venturing and not to return. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. I loved all of the representation in here. I haven't read The Wicker King yet, but I am definitely going to immediately, because if this has if this is an example of Kay Ancrum's writing, it's incredible. I loved it. I cannot wait to read more. Definitely gonna be one of my favorite books of the year.
So those were just a few of the favorite books that we read in January. As always, we like to hear what you have read as well. You can leave those in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe for more bookish videos every week. Happy reading. Thanks for being awesome. Bye.